Picture this, two colleagues in your staff room. One sits beside you, leans in and says, let's work through this together. They ask you questions. They get you to explain your thinking and refuse to give you the answer until you've earned it. The other one pops their head in and says, hey, here's what you need. Boom, done. 5 minutes later, you're sorted and you're back to your marking pile or whatever task you're working on. This week, I met the two personalities in AI form. And both these personalities are important for us, depending on our context and situation. But at the same time, are they good for our students? Hi, I'm Kane. Welcome back to the Teachers AI Cafe, where we explore practical, no-nonsense ways educators can use AI to save time, spark learning, and make teaching just a little bit easier for us, because we need it. In today's episode, we'll be looking at two new AI learning features that have been released. The first one is ChatGPT's Study and Learn mode, released in late July 2025, so very new. And Google's Gemini's guided learning that's just been launched. Like I said, they're always competing with each other for features and usability. Now, I've tested both of them by acting like a student in two different subjects. One, I chose, my background is obviously in IT, so I'm a specialist digital technologies, computer science teacher. And I picked a really simple question from what a parent I saw posted up on a tutoring platform here on Facebook, and which is HTML coding. And the second one, I've got my love of history, which is as a specialist history teacher as well, is the Weimar Germany's 1923 crisis. My daughter's recently done this in a Year 11 course. And today I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened, how they differ, how they can be used in the classroom, and why the reactions from teachers are far from unanimous. So what was it like when I acted as a student? So the first one I'm going to talk about is ChatGPT Study and Learn. Now this is accessible in both the free and the paid version. And when you go into ChatGPT, you select the option, you get a drop-down menu, and you pick Study and Learn. Now in terms of using this, I found it was much more structured and teacherly or teacher-like in its manner, almost like a carefully planned lesson that was scaffolded stepping through it. So when I looked at the HTML task, and I went really, really basic here, I didn't want to spend a lot of time on it, it started with a question. Do you already know what HTML is and how the browser uses it? Well, I said no. I used an analogy. HTML is like a skeleton on a web page. Then I laid out the purpose of HTML before touching on the code. It gave me a visual scaffold of the HTML structure, but held back left me type till I understood what each part's role was in the HTML. It checked my understanding with targeted questions like, what's the difference between the title and a H1? And then it corrected my misconception without making me feel wrong. I gave responses in the chat window, and it corrected and adjusted as we'd normally do with our students. And then only after I attempted my own page, because it asked me to do that, it suggested a single improvement. So it took me through what I was missing when I was doing the code to explain, and then explain me why we need to add that in there. It introduced me to images, and it wasn't as, this is how you do it, but here's the pattern, now try it yourself. So it showed me that some code, basic code, I can use to put a picture in HTML, and then it asked me to try it myself, and I could step through and have a check. And then it then asked to review what I did, and then gave me feedback based on that. I found the process really, really helpful, particularly if I hadn't done HTML before, because it took me through all the different components. It was really well scaffolded. So in the same chat, I thought, okay, let's jump into history. So what I put it in now for my history class, I'm learning about the crisis of 1923 in Weimar, Germany. And ChatGPT said to me, got it? Well, switching gears to history. Before we dive into details, can you tell me, do you already know why Germany was in crisis in 1923? Or should we start with a bigger picture of what led up to it? And I responded with a really basic. The Weimar government decided to stop next reparation payment, and the French only occupied the Ruhr, so I made a deliberate mistake in there. So it said, right, you've got the trigger and the event down, and then it tells me, let's build the fuller picture together. In 1923, Weimar Germany faced what historians called a triple crisis, a political, economic and social, and the Ruhr occupation was a big part of that. So as you see, it began by checking what I knew in the 1923 crisis. When I gave the trigger event, it scaffolded and gave me a broader picture of the political, economic and social crisis. Then it asked me to define inflation before giving me some examples. So it gave me my answer, and like I said, I gave it a fairly rough answer, like a student might not know. And then it started giving me different examples I could actually read through, and I said, oh, that makes sense to me. And then at that point, he then used a quiz format without me asking, and went back into quiz format as a recall 3 types of the crisis. So when it felt it had enough of a discussion with me, it then went back and said, okay, we're going to do a quick quiz, which I then answered. It said, well, I wasn't on the right track. Then when to wrap it up, it asked me to write, can you put into a sentence the events that we spoke about? And I said, no, I don't know how to do that. So what it automatically generated for me was a closed activity. Basically, it ended with a sentence building exercise to synthesize the entire picture. So it gave me a paragraph with spaces missing in a closed activity to actually, for me to fill in the different blanks. And I thought, this is fantastic. This is this structured learning and recall process that we naturally do in our classroom. So overall, in terms of using it for both, I felt it was slow, but it was a very deliberate walk through the process. At every step, it paused to check what I understood and made me work for the answer. It just didn't give it to me. So I found this process really, really good, particularly if you're working with a class that is not familiar with the topic you're going through, or a student who is really, really struggling, and you can set them aside for this activity. They could then step through it, hopefully get more assistance while checking in with you. So how was Gemini process? In their system, it's called guided learning, which is different from the ChatGPT. The tone was efficient, tutorial-like, and aimed to give more coverage than questioning, more actually giving me the answers. And I felt it sort of built on the sort of thing you normally get when you put it into actual Google. So now when you do a Google search, you often put a query in there, it'll have that AI summary at the beginning of your search and then links to the web pages below that. And I found it sort of had that sort of style built into it, which probably makes sense because it's the same engineering team. So in Gemini, I started with exactly the same 2 parts that I wanted to act as a student, so I got a good comparison. So I told her I want to learn how to write HTML for a basic homepage with a title. That's a great place to start for web development. It responded. We'll begin with the absolute basics of HTML. Then I went through explaining what HTML actually stands for. It's a standard language used to create web pages, hypertext markup language. So I don't want to get too much in the technical, especially if you're in a different area. Then it asked me, do you know what the first line of HTML document should be? It's a special declaration that tells the browser what kind of a document. What it did, it actually went straight into the first line HTML document and it actually gave me an example straight up. So I actually printed it for me, which is a bit different to ChatGPT. So I started giving me the answers in full very, very quickly, instead of prompting me to work my way through it myself. So it very rapidly moved on to doc type declaration HTML structure without really asking for any of my prior knowledge whatsoever. It introduced things like the head and the body immediately, then asked, would you like to add a title? And when I asked about images, it just gave me the exact IMG syntax first, then explained how source and alt worked. So it was more the case of me, when a student comes to you and says, Miss or Mister, how do you do this? And you just give them the answer, or they just want the answer from you. Whereas obviously I like to do with my students is I'll try and get them to think through themselves, work through the problem without just giving me the answer. The Gemini system is more like, okay, you're not sure, this is the answer. And then it sort of tries to explain the answer to you. The same with the history task. So same sort of process. Confirm my starting point, but jump very quickly into a concise, well-structured explanation of the rural crisis. So it pretty much just gave me the whole answer straight up. It used fewer intermediate questions. It tended to deliver a full explanation. Then it'll drop in, what do you think happened next? I think, well, it's like me giving virtually all the answer. Then my students saying, what do you think happened next? And getting them to summarize. But you don't really have time to process and understand the events around the history in more depth that really articulate that idea, the more guessing. And it really circled back for actual recall testing whatsoever. Whereas ChatGPT would randomly start doing recall activities and check that you understand before it actually proceeded. The overall feel of it? Well, this was more like your helpful classmate or a revision guide that pretty much got you straight to the answer. Gave me what I needed really fast, but did less mental heavy lifting along the way. So it pretty much said this is the answer. And we're looking at cognitive offloading there that I didn't really have to work for it. If I just put a couple of prompts in and said I didn't know what the answer was, it literally gave it to me. So it's not as well structured and compared to the way ChatGPT is at the moment in terms of the study modes. How can we use these in the classrooms? Well, this ChatGPT Study and Learn, it's best for, I guess, a guided practice in class where we're thinking through a process that actually matters. You really want them to understand it. It works well for a flipped learning task or classroom structure where the students explore before they actually come to class. I can see big benefits for that. And it's ideal for revision sessions aimed at recall and reasoning. just not memorization. And this is applicable to all years, is they can start testing their knowledge working through when they're preparing for things like tests and exams and other assessments where they need to recall the information, not a take-home task. Gemini's guided learning, useful for quick clarifications during a task. Great for catch-up work for absent students. Instead of sitting down with, say, a textbook or other resources, you can get them to jump on Gemini and step through the process and learn. Perfect when you need concise explanations without slowing down the pace. So this is, if a student who's only working on a couple of points or a couple of, say, aspects of it, Gemini would be very good because you can get the answers very, very quickly. But if it's a brand new student or a new topic or they need more help or more in-depth, ChatGPT seems to be the better of the two. It's the fishing rod versus the fish analogy. ChatGPT teaches you how to fish. Gemini will hand you one when you're short on time. There's been discussion around this, some positive and negatives of people out in the educational world. So in a webinar from the New South Wales Department of Education, the positive, they said, it's like giving every student a personal tutor who adjusts to their pace. EDU research, forum online, they felt this reduces the fear of asking silly questions in front of peers. And that's a positive thing because they're getting answers without having to put their hand up and ask those particular questions. And I know we all suffer from that in our classrooms. The students, need to ask questions, but don't, because of that fear of doing it in front of the class. Edutopia had a nice article, and they say it's differentiation at scale, because the AI slows down for those who need it and speeds up for those that don't. So it depends on the situation there. But of course, there's always negatives, and it's new. And there's obviously some issues with it. One high school teacher said some students just want the answer. They find the slow questioning frustrating. So they might be better on Gemini versus ChatGPT. Or they're the type of students who will just go Google the answer and think it's correct without understanding the process of how to get to it. And the Australian Council for Educational Leaders, which is big here down under, if students know how they can rely on AI to walk them through everything, they might avoid independent thinking. And I've addressed these in other podcasts, but like I said, that's how we've got to educate our students and show them how to use it properly. And feedback from a student, which is always good. The novelty wears off. Some skip prompts just to get the answer, and that's pretty much normal. See, when they first got on, it will be interesting, but remember at this stage, it's a text-based format. So the novelty will not be there. It isn't exciting. It isn't a computer game with frequent dopamine hits that keep them engaged. It's still a process of working through an intellectual process. What's our role as teachers when AI is doing the guided questioning? I see us shifting towards more facilitators than explicitly teaching everything to our students. Just like platforms we use, such as Education Perfect in Australia, where the teachers go in, they can design, they use existing templates to design, students stepping through their learning process, we're still steering the learning. But instead of delivering every explanation ourselves, we're stepping in to guide, clarify, and extend what the AI tutor starts for us. And we do this in lots of formats anyway. So we use PowerPoint slides. We can then use them in the classroom, teach it explicitly and step through it, or we can record ourselves on it and put it on a video and they can watch it. We use videos, we use other tools. We already do that and we do adapt and change. At the core of it, our knowledge and skills is what there to help the students. And the AI systems will only take it so far. However, they're a tool that we can use to fill in the gaps that we can do when we're looking at a class of, say, 32 students with different needs, working at different speeds. However, we use it, the impact won't be the same for every student. Highly motivated students will thrive. They can take ownership, move at their own pace, and deepen their understanding without waiting for the whole class. Low engagement students might ignore the questions, click through, and still disengage from the learning. They alone won't magically turn disinterested students into motivated students. That is still our role. Could AI tutors make unmotivated students more engaged? Possibly, if the interaction style hooks them. But that's where we need to help frame the right questions and understand why to use it. But as I said already, it's a text-based format at the moment. If we use voice commands, I don't know how you do it in a class of 32 kids, or they can use it at home, it's much more engaging for them and easier, and they don't have to rely on their typing speed. And this raises another point, where we need to specify the exact questions students should ask as part of a learning process. Probably. That's a whole other episode. but my gut says yes. Without scaffolding their prompts, even their starting questions, many students will miss the depth that these tools can actually provide them. Once again, we need to teach our students how to use these tools effectively. To do that, we need to know how to use them ourselves. Flexibility. Well, this is when AI tutors shine. They're available anytime. They adapt to the learner's pace, and they don't get tired from answering the same question over and over again. But they also require us, the teachers, to monitor the quality and keep the learning goals in front and centre. Whether we choose the slow questioning tutor or the quick, efficient explainer, AI is starting to take on teaching personalities. Our job is to decide which style suits which moment, and we can use multiple tools to do this. Teach students how to use these tools purposely. Keep ourselves in the loop as facilitators and overall controllers of their learning journey. Because in the end, AI is a guide, a conversation, but it's the teacher who keeps that conversation pointed in the right direction. So do go away, have a play with it now. Put some questions in it, act like your students. Think of some of the questions your students ask repeatedly in class. Can the tutors, whether you use ChatGPT or Gemini, answer those questions in a format that helps your students according to your professional experience? And if it does work, you can then look at integrating it. But once in, controlling it, plan it, explain to the students how they should use it and why we're doing these particular activities is very important. Hope you found this as useful as I have in terms of what I can do in my classroom with my students to help them grow and develop. Before we wrap up this episode, I'd just like to reiterate, in the show notes, there's an email you can contact me. We'll always put a link in there for the Facebook group. I am putting a guide or show notes now up in there. So if you log in, there's a link to the episode itself. There's also an extra post there. It's a PDF document you can download with the summary notes of the information from this. So do go check it out. And if you've got any questions or things you want me to cover while you're in Facebook, just post in there with your question. Or you might be able to answer it there and then. Or if it's a bigger conversation, I can do a podcast episode around that. So whether you're at home, in the car, or out for a walk, keep up the good work. Look after yourselves. And I'll hear from you soon.